The steakhouse was the kind of place where conversations disappeared into leather booths and low lighting, where the clink of silverware on bone china provided just enough cover for the kinds of talks people didn't want overheard. It was a Thursday night in October, unseasonably warm, and the jazz quartet in the corner was working through something slow and deliberate. Her diamond bracelet, new, I'd noticed when she arrived, caught the candlelight every time she reached for her wine glass. I should have known then. She'd chosen the place. She'd chosen the time. She'd even ordered for both of us before I arrived, some kind of efficiency play I mistook for thoughtfulness. We were 20 minutes into polite catch-up, the kind of surface conversation you have when something heavier is waiting underneath, when she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded cocktail napkin. Not a letter. Not her phone. A napkin, creased once down the middle, with 2 numbers written in her neat, slanted handwriting. She slid it across the table like a contract. "That's you," she said, tapping the first number with 1 manicured nail. "And that's me. After the promotion." I looked down. My salary, the one I'd been honest about 6 months ago when we talked about moving in together, was written in blue ink on the left. Hers, nearly double, sat on the right with a small underline for emphasis. The napkin smelled faintly of her perfume, something expensive I'd helped her pick out last Christmas. "I've been thinking about this for a while," she continued, voice calm, almost clinical. "And I need someone on my level now. Financially. Professionally. I need a partner who's where I am, not someone I'm waiting for to catch up." The room didn't change. The jazz didn't stop. The couple 2 tables over kept laughing at something on their phone. But everything narrowed to the space between us, to the neat math she'd made of 2 years, to the decimal point that had apparently decided my worth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue the numbers or defend the choices I'd made, the pay cut I'd taken 8 months ago to pour everything into a project she'd called, "Your Little Tech Thing," with a smile that wasn't quite kind. I just sat there, watching her face, looking for some crack in the composure, some sign that this was hard for her too. There wasn't one. "I think that's fair," she said, filling the silence I hadn't meant to leave. "Don't you?" I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned a long time ago that some people mistake silence for consent, and I wanted to see how far she'd go. She finished her wine. She flagged the waiter for the check, insisting on splitting it even though she'd been the one to order the $90 bottle. And then, as we stood to leave, she held out her hand. "I'll need the spare key back," she said. "To the condo." I reached into my pocket, felt the cold metal of her key on my ring, the one she'd given me 10 months ago with a speech about trust and next steps and building something real. I unhooked it, dropped it into her palm. She closed her fingers around it immediately, slipping it into her bag before I could change my mind, as if I might suddenly realize what I was giving up. The warmth of the room, the candles, the people, the low hum of comfort and wealth, pressed in around us. But between us, there was only the cold transactional truth she'd laid out on a napkin. She'd measured me, found me lacking, and executed the ending with the same efficiency she'd probably brought to her quarterly reviews. She kissed me on the cheek. She said she hoped we could stay friends. She walked out into the October night, her heels clicking on marble, her bracelet catching the streetlights as she raised her hand for a cab. I stood there for a moment longer, watching her go, feeling the empty space on my keyring where her key used to sit. The maitre d' asked if everything was all right. I said it was. I tipped him $20 for a table I'd barely eaten at, walked to my car, and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. The napkin was still in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, looked at the numbers one more time, then folded it carefully and put it in my glove box. Not as a souvenir. As a receipt. Evidence of the exact moment someone decided I wasn't enough, written in her own hand, dated by the restaurant's logo printed in the corner. I didn't cry. I didn't call her. I didn't post anything or text our mutual friends or do any of the things people do when they're trying to make sense of an ending. I just drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past, thinking about keys and access and all the doors I'd been building that she'd never thought to notice. I didn't text her that night. I didn't call. I didn't do any of the things people do when they're trying to undo an ending or negotiate their way back into a story that's already been written without them. Instead, I sat in my car outside her building for 5 silent minutes, engine off, phone face down on the passenger seat, watching the lights in her 10th floor window. The building was one of those new glass towers in the financial district, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that made privacy a luxury you paid extra for. I could see her moving around up there, a shadow passing back and forth across the curtains. Probably pouring herself another glass of wine. Probably texting someone about how well she'd handled it, how clean the break had been, how mature we'd both been about the whole thing. I had a key to that building once. Not just the spare to her condo, but the fob that opened the lobby doors, the code for the garage, the knowledge of which elevator bank moved fastest during rush hour. I'd had access, the kind you earn through time and trust and 100 small moments of being let in. Now I was outside, looking up, no longer part of the infrastructure of her life. The shock should have hit harder. That's what I kept waiting for, the anger, the spiraling thoughts, the need to call someone and explain what had just happened in language that would make me the wronged party. But it didn't come. Instead, there was just this strange, cold clarity settling over me like snow. She'd looked at a number and decided I wasn't enough. She'd done math where there should have been memory, subtraction where there should have been addition. And in doing that, she'd revealed something I'd been too close to see: she'd never actually looked at what I was building. She'd only ever seen what I was earning. For 2 years, I'd been running a side project she'd dismissed as, your little tech thing, with the kind of affectionate condescension people use when they don't want to be openly cruel. A SaaS platform for supply chain optimization, boring on the surface, transformative underneath for the companies that understood what it could do. I'd been working nights, weekends, the margins of time most people waste on streaming services and doom scrolling. I'd been building something real, something scalable, something that had just hit $40,000 in monthly recurring revenue 3 weeks ago. I'd told her about that milestone. She'd said, "That's great, babe," without looking up from her phone. The reframe happened somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd minute of sitting there. It wasn't about winning her back. It wasn't even about proving her wrong, not really. It was about proving I was never the small story she needed me to be so she could feel bigger by comparison. She'd measured me at my salary because that was the only unit of measurement she trusted. But I'd been building in a currency she couldn't see: equity, leverage, the kind of power that doesn't show up on a W-2. My phone buzzed. Then again. Then 3 more times in quick succession. I didn't need to look to know what was happening. Our mutual friends, her mutual friends, mostly, the ones from her MBA cohort and her company's leadership retreats, were already getting her version of events. The texts would be sympathetic, carefully worded, designed to make sure I knew the story was out there and that I should probably stay quiet if I wanted to preserve whatever dignity she'd decided to leave me. I picked up my phone. 7 messages. I opened none of them. Instead, I scrolled to my email and pulled up the folder I'd labeled Traction, Investor Updates, Pilot Program Results, Revenue Charts that curved upward in ways that made venture capitalists pay attention. The most recent email was from an angel group I'd been courting for 3 months. Subject line: Next steps, let's talk terms. Her social media was already updating. I didn't follow her anymore. I'd quietly unfollowed 2 months ago when I'd started to suspect where this was heading, but Instagram has a way of surfacing the people you're trying to avoid. A mutual friend had tagged her in a story, a photo of her at some rooftop bar, hair perfect, smile bright, caption about new chapters, and growth, and all the other words people use when they want you to know they're doing better without you. Noise. All of it. The texts, the posts, the carefully curated narrative of her glow-up and my fade-out. She needed the audience, needed the validation, needed everyone to see her winning. I put the phone away. The lights in her window went out. 10:43 p.m. She was probably going to bed, probably sleeping soundly, probably convinced she'd made the smart, mature, financially responsible decision. I started the car. The engine turned over smooth and quiet, and I pulled out of the visitor parking spot I'd used dozens of times before. I didn't look back at the building. There was nothing to see there anymore, no access to reclaim, no key I wanted returned. The decision had already made itself. 2 years ago, I was entry-level and she was already 3 rungs up the ladder. We met at a company mixer in one of those hotel ballrooms with 2 bright chandeliers and networking that felt like speed dating for professionals. I was wearing a suit I'd bought on sale, nursing a beer I didn't want, when she walked up and asked if I knew anyone there. I didn't. Neither did she. We bonded over being ambitious and tired and a little bit lost in a room full of people who seemed to have everything figured out. She loved my work ethic then. The late nights at the office, the weekend strategy decks I'd build just to teach myself new frameworks, the way I'd talk about problems like puzzles I couldn't wait to solve. She'd call me at 11 p.m. and I'd still be at my desk, and she'd say it was sexy that I cared that much. She'd forward me job postings at companies she thought were on my level, her way of saying she believed I was going somewhere. But then her income doubled. And then it doubled again. And somewhere in that trajectory, her respect for my path started shrinking in inverse proportion to her salary. The late nights became, maybe you should push back more. The weekend work became, they're not paying you for that, right? The ambition she'd found attractive started looking like naivety, like I didn't understand how the game was actually played. I did understand. I just wasn't playing the same game. While she was climbing, and she was good at climbing, genuinely good, the kind of competent mid-manager who could run a division and make it look easy, I was building something she never bothered to look at closely. The little tech thing she'd mentioned to friends with a patient smile, the side project she'd tolerate as long as it didn't interfere with date nights or her company events. It was a SaaS platform for supply chain optimization. Boring, right? That's what most people thought. That's what she thought. But boring problems are where the money lives, especially when you solve them well. 3 of her company's direct competitors were already running pilot programs with my software, testing it against their legacy ERP systems that cost 10 times as much and delivered half the visibility. I'd started building it 18 months ago with $2,000 and a hypothesis. Mid-market manufacturers were bleeding cash on inventory inefficiencies they couldn't see because their systems were 15 years out of date and their consultants charged too much to care. I was right. The first beta client saved $40,000 in 3 months. The second saved more. By month 6, I had revenue. By month 12, I had a product that worked. I'd been patient. Methodical. Underpaid by design, because every dollar I didn't take as salary went back into infrastructure, better servers, a contract developer for the features I couldn't code myself, legal fees for the IP that actually mattered. I was living lean, driving a car I'd paid off in college, splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate who worked night shifts and barely noticed I existed. She'd asked me once why I didn't just get a better job, something with a real salary, stock options, the kind of trajectory she could explain to her friends without qualifiers. I told her I was reinvesting in the future. She'd nodded, but I could see the math she was doing, the same math she'd eventually write on a napkin. Now, 2 years in, I was pre-Series A, bootstrapped to $40,000 in monthly recurring revenue. That number sounds good until you run it through reality. It barely covered operating costs, contractor payments, and the bare minimum I needed to keep my own lights on. I wasn't profitable yet, not technically, but the unit economics were sound. Every dollar I spent on customer acquisition was coming back multiplied. The model worked. It just needed scale, and scale needed capital, and capital needed time. I was liquid poor by choice. Broke on paper, if you only counted the number in my checking account. But I had equity in something real, something growing, something that 3 companies were already paying to use and 5 more were in conversations about. Her ladder was visible. Validated. Every promotion came with a LinkedIn announcement and a team lunch and a new title on her email signature. People could see her success, measure it, celebrate it. It fit into the frameworks everyone understood: corporate hierarchies, salary bands, the clear rungs you climbed from coordinator to manager to director to VP. My foundation was invisible. No announcements, no team lunches, no title changes. Just late nights, incremental revenue growth, and a slowly compounding asset she'd never thought to ask about beyond the surface dismissal. She'd seen my low salary and assumed that was the whole story. She'd never asked about equity, about MRR, about the difference between income and wealth. The stakes were clarifying now, sitting in my apartment the night after the breakup, looking at the spreadsheet I'd been updating every Friday for 18 months. I wasn't the story she'd needed me to be, the stable partner with the predictable paycheck, the match who made sense on paper when her friends asked what I did for a living. But I'd never been trying to be that story. I'd been building a different one entirely, and she'd missed it because she'd stopped looking. By Saturday morning, the decision had already made itself. I spent the weekend drawing the map. Her company, the one she'd worked at for 6 years, the one she talked about like it was hers even though she owned exactly 0% of it, was called Garrison Supply Company. Mid-sized, family-owned, profitable in that old money way where the margins were comfortable but unexamined. They distributed industrial components to manufacturers across the Midwest, the kind of business that had been running the same playbook since 1987 and saw no reason to change it. I knew the company better than she realized. I'd done 2 consulting gigs in the same vertical 3 years ago, back when I was freelancing nights to fund the early prototype of my platform. I knew their systems. More specifically, I knew they were still running on a legacy ERP that probably cost them 6 figures a year in maintenance alone and gave them almost no real-time visibility into their inventory flow. I knew their margins were tight in a way that good software could fix. I knew they were technologically stagnant, not because they were stupid, but because no one in leadership had the vision or energy to modernize. I knew the founder, Malcolm Garrison, was 68 and semi-retired, splitting time between the office and a vacation property in Scottsdale. I knew this because she'd complained about it, how he was always checked out, how decisions took weeks because he had to be consulted but was never actually around. I knew there was no clear succession plan, because she'd been angling for a promotion to COO for 18 months and kept hitting a wall that she blamed on Malcolm's son, who supposedly wanted the role but didn't have the skills. And I knew she was VP of Operations, a title that sounded impressive and came with a good salary, but no equity. She was an employee. A well-paid employee, sure, but an employee nonetheless. She could be replaced. Or she could stay, if she chose to, but only if she accepted the terms of whoever owned the company next. The math started to clarify. My platform already served 3 of Garrison's competitors. It wouldn't be hard to build a thesis around operational synergy, acquire Garrison, integrate my software, cut their costs by 20%, use the combined entity to cross-sell to their existing client base. It wasn't revenge. It was strategic alignment. The kind of deal that made sense on paper regardless of who worked there. But it would require capital I didn't have yet, and leverage I'd need to build carefully. I opened my laptop and pulled up the list of angel groups I'd been courting for the past 4 months. 2 of them had expressed serious interest after my last pitch, early-stage investors who liked operational SaaS with proven traction and a clear path to Series A. I'd been planning to raise a modest seed round to scale customer acquisition, but now I needed to reframe the conversation. Not just growth capital. Acquisition capital. I drafted emails to both groups. Subject line, expanded thesis, strategic M&A opportunity. I kept the language clean, professional, curious rather than aggressive. I've identified a target that would accelerate our go-to-market by 18 to 24 months and provide immediate revenue diversification. Would love to explore if this changes your appetite for the round. Sent at 9:47 a.m. on Saturday. Both groups replied by Monday morning. Next, I reached out to a corporate M&A advisor I'd met at a founder meetup 6 months ago. His name was Richard Chen, and he ran a boutique firm that specialized in lower middle market roll-ups, exactly the kind of deal I was sketching. I'd stayed in touch with him the way you stay in touch with people you think you might need someday, occasional emails, a coffee meeting here and there, enough goodwill that a cold call wouldn't feel cold. Richard wanted to run a potential target by you. Manufacturing distribution, family-owned, $15-20 in revenue, strong fundamentals but tech debt. Owner is retirement age, no obvious succession. I have operational SaaS that could integrate cleanly. Worth a conversation. He responded in 40 minutes. Let's talk Tuesday. Send me what you have. I spent Saturday night building the acquisition thesis. 23 slides, clean design, every claim backed by data I'd been collecting for 2 years without knowing why. Garrison's estimated revenue based on public filings and industry benchmarks. Their likely cost structure. The competitors I was already working with and the savings they were seeing. The strategic rationale for why a software plus services roll-up made sense in this vertical. The financing structure I'd need, probably $5 million cash at close, another $3 million in earnout tied to performance metrics. I saved the file at 2:14 a.m. Garrison_acquisition_thesis_v1.pdf. Dated 3 days after the breakup. Sunday, I started working the list. I signed NDAs with both angel groups so I could share the target name. I scheduled the call with Richard for Tuesday at 10 a.m. I reached out to a fractional CFO I'd been talking to about bringing on part-time, someone who could model the deal properly and knew how to run due diligence. His name was Tom Winters, and he'd spent 15 years in corporate development before going independent. More importantly, he used to audit companies in Garrison's space. He'd know what to look for. Tom, pivot question, if I wanted to acquire a $15 million distribution company and integrate it with my SaaS platform, could you model the structure and lead diligence? Timeline would be aggressive, 90 days if the deal gets warm. He called me instead of emailing. That's a different kind of scaling than we discussed. You ready for that? I think so. Let me see the thesis. If the numbers work, I'm in. I sent it. He called back 2 hours later. This could actually work. Margins are there, synergy story is clean. You'll need someone who knows their systems, though. Any chance you have an in? I did. I'd been sleeping next to her for 2 years. While she was posting about new chapters and growth and all the narrative work that comes with ending a relationship cleanly, I was building a calendar that looked like preparation for war. Investor calls, advisor meetings, financial models that ran scenarios from conservative to aggressive. I was opening doors she didn't know existed, cap tables, term sheet structures, the specific language you use when you're trying to buy a company without tipping your hand too early. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who couldn't see your blueprint, who looked at the surface and assumed that was the whole story, then you know what that weekend felt like. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. It was the strange, calm power of realizing you've been holding keys to rooms they never thought to ask about. By Sunday night, the map was drawn. The path was clear. All that remained was execution. The next 90 days were a masterclass in surgical precision, the kind of work that leaves no drama in its wake, only receipts. Week 1, I closed a $1.2 million seed round led by Benchmark Operational Partners, a fund that specialized in exactly this kind of play, software companies that could roll up fragmented industries through strategic acquisition. The term sheet took 4 days to negotiate. I gave up 2 board seats but kept control. The press release was drafted, approved, and embargoed until the acquisition closed. The wire transfer hit my business account on a Tuesday morning. I watched the number appear on my screen, 7 figures, real capital, the kind of leverage that changes what's possible, and felt nothing but focus. Week 2, I brought Tom Winters on officially as fractional CFO at $8,000 a month. He was worth every dollar. Tom had audited Garrison Supply Company 4 years ago when they'd explored a credit line expansion, which meant he still had contacts inside their accounting department and a deep familiarity with their systems. Within 10 days, he'd flagged something critical: Garrison was burning cash on a failed digital transformation project. They'd hired an enterprise consulting firm 18 months ago to modernize their ERP, paid $400,000 upfront, and the implementation had stalled at 30% complete. Worse, they were facing a Q4 vendor squeeze. Several key suppliers had shortened their payment terms after Garrison missed 2 remittance deadlines, which meant their working capital was tighter than their public financials suggested. "They're stable but stressed," Tom told me over a Zoom call at 10 p.m. on a Thursday. "If you come in with a clean offer and a story about operational efficiency, Malcolm's going to listen. He's tired." Week 4, my platform's pilot with Garrison's largest competitor, a company called Midland Industrial, went live. The results were immediate: 17% reduction in carrying costs in the first 30 days, real-time inventory visibility they'd never had before, automated reorder triggers that eliminated 2 full-time positions worth of manual work. Midland's COO was so pleased he wrote a case study for a supply chain trade journal that published in early November. The headline: How Mid-Market Distributors Are Finally Solving the Inventory Visibility Problem. Her boss's boss read it. I know because Tom's contact inside Garrison forwarded me an email thread where Malcolm Garrison himself had replied, "Why aren't we doing this?" The pressure was building from the inside, and she had no idea I was the one applying it. Week 6, I incorporated an acquisition vehicle, Newco Operational Holdings, LLC, and retained Richard Chen's M&A firm on a success fee basis. The retainer was $15,000, painful but necessary. Richard's job was to approach Malcolm quietly, position the offer as a legacy play rather than a distressed sale, and keep the temperature warm without overheating it. He was good at this. He'd done 73 deals in the lower middle market. He knew how to talk to founders who were tired but proud. Week 7 brought the pattern interrupt that changed everything. Richard called me on a Wednesday afternoon, voice careful but excited. "I found something. Malcolm's son, the one everyone assumes is going to take over, he doesn't want the company. He wants to move to New Zealand with his wife, who's from Auckland. He's been quiet about it because he doesn't want to disappoint his father, but he's ready to exit. He'd take cash for his minority stake and walk away clean." The deal temperature spiked. Malcolm wasn't just tired, he was facing the reality that his succession plan was a fantasy. Richard positioned me as the solution: a young operator with industry software, enough capital to be credible, and the operational chops to honor the legacy while modernizing the business. Week 9, we submitted a non-binding letter of intent. $8 million total enterprise value, structured as $5 million cash at close and $3 million in earnout tied to EBITDA targets over 24 months. The earnout was designed to keep Malcolm engaged during the transition without requiring him to stay forever. He could retire in phases, consult from Scottsdale, and watch the company stabilize under new ownership. Malcolm's attorney requested changes. We negotiated for 11 days. One of my angel investors got cold feet halfway through, spooked by the size of the deal relative to my company's current revenue. I replaced him in 72 hours with a family office that specialized in operational roll-ups. The new investor wired $200,000 for their stake on a Friday. We re-signed the cap table on Monday. Week 10, due diligence began. 60 days of audits, site visits, document requests, and quality of earnings reports. Tom led the process with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. He found issues. Of course he found issues, every deal has issues, but nothing deal-breaking. Garrison's margins were thinner than we'd hoped, but their customer retention was stellar. Their systems were outdated, but their reputation was solid. The numbers worked if we moved quickly on integration. I lived in spreadsheets and Zoom calls. Cap table modeling at 7 a.m. Diligence calls with attorneys at lunch. Integration planning with Tom at 9 p.m. Slack messages with Richard at 11 p.m., parsing Malcolm's latest concerns, adjusting language in the purchase agreement, building trust through a screen. The contrast was sharp and deliberate. While I was negotiating earnout structures and reviewing QOE reports that flagged $18,000 in uncollectible receivables, she was posting Instagram stories from team offsites and leadership retreats. Photos of her smiling in a conference room with a whiteboard behind her that said, Q4 goals. Captions about growth and gratitude and being exactly where I'm supposed to be. She had no idea the company she worked for was being sold. No idea the systems she relied on were about to be replaced with software I'd built. No idea that the little tech thing she dismissed was now the key to her professional future, the axis around which her entire work life would soon rotate. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't tell anyone outside the deal team. I just kept working, kept moving capital, kept building access to rooms she didn't know existed. By day 87, we had a signed purchase agreement. By day 90, the wire instructions were confirmed, title insurance was ordered, and the close date was set for 3 weeks out. I saved every artifact, the LOI with Malcolm's signature, the QOE report with Tom's annotations, the Slack screenshots where our attorney flagged risks, and I made the call to proceed anyway. These were the keys I'd been building, not to her condo, but to the cap table, to the ownership structure, to the very foundation of the company she thought was hers. And she still had no idea I was holding them. The close date was 3 weeks out when I decided she needed to hear it from me first. It wasn't kindness, exactly, though it wasn't cruelty either. It was standard practice. Before a deal announcement, you notify key stakeholders, especially senior employees who might feel blindsided, who might decide to walk, who might create complications you don't need during a fragile transition. Richard had suggested I handle it personally. She's going to find out either way, he'd said. Better it comes from you in private than from Malcolm in front of the whole company. I reached out through a mutual contact, someone neutral who could frame it as a conversation rather than an ambush. The message was simple: would she be open to coffee? Something I need to discuss regarding Garrison. No details. No context. Just enough to get her to show up. She agreed. We picked a restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral ground, a place with no memories attached. It was a Tuesday at 6 p.m., the kind of off-peak timing that guaranteed quiet corners and privacy. I arrived first. I wore a suit, charcoal gray, tailored, the kind I'd bought after the seed round closed because investor meetings and acquisition negotiations required a uniform I hadn't needed before. It was the first time she'd see me in one. I wanted her to notice. She walked in 7 minutes late, scanning the room until she spotted me. Her face shifted, confusion, maybe curiosity, as she registered the suit, the posture, the fact that I wasn't slouched over a beer looking wounded. She sat down across from me, ordered water, and folded her hands on the table in that controlled way people do when they're preparing for difficult conversations. Thanks for meeting me, I said. Of course. She smiled, tentative. I wasn't sure what this was about, but I'm glad we're talking. I've been wanting to check in, make sure you're okay. I let the assumption sit there for a moment, that this was closure, maybe an apology, maybe me finally processing the breakup in a healthy, mature way. Then I said it plainly. I'm acquiring your company. The deal closes in 3 weeks. I wanted you to hear it from me first, not at the all hands. Her face went through stages. Confusion first, a slight tilt of her head, like she'd misheard. Then disbelief, her eyes narrowing as she tried to process the words into something that made sense. Then the slow math, the kind you can see happening in real time as someone's brain runs scenarios and discards them one by one until only the impossible truth remains. What are you talking about? Her voice was steady, but barely. Garrison Supply Company. I've been in acquisition talks with Malcolm for the past 2 months. We signed the purchase agreement last week. The deal closes on the 15th. I'm the new majority owner. She stared at me. Opened her mouth. Closed it. Reached for her phone like it might have answers, then stopped halfway, her hand hovering over the table. I pulled out my own phone, opened my email, and forwarded her the embargoed press release. Subject line, Garrison Supply Company. Acquired by Nuco Operational Holdings. The draft had been approved by legal, waiting only for the close date to make it public. Her phone buzzed. She looked down, opened the email, read the first paragraph. I watched her face as the reality settled in. My name as CEO of the acquiring entity, Malcolm's quote about finding the right partner to carry the legacy forward, the language about operational synergies and technological integration. This is real, she said. Not a question. A statement, quiet and stunned. Yes. You're buying Garrison. I am. She set her phone down carefully, like it might break. How? Seed round closed in September. I've been building relationships with M&A advisors for 6 months. Malcolm's been looking for an exit. The timing aligned. Your tech thing, she said slowly, the pieces assembling. That's what this is about. The SaaS platform, yes. 3 of your competitors are already using it. The acquisition makes strategic sense, integrate the software, reduce costs, cross-sell to the existing client base. It's a clean operational roll-up. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't fill the silence. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a notification. Finally, she spoke. Why are you telling me this? Why not just let Malcolm announce it? Because you're VP of Operations, I said. You're integral to the transition. I need you to stay, at least through the integration. I wanted you to hear it from me so you could make an informed decision about what comes next. Make a decision. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm an employee. You're going to be my boss. Yes. The contrast was so sharp it didn't need stating. 3 months ago, she'd held all the power, the spare key to her condo, the breakup speech, the salary comparison on a napkin that had rendered judgment on my worth. She'd decided I wasn't enough, executed the ending with precision, and walked away clean. Now she was sitting across from someone who just bought the infrastructure of her professional life. She wasn't the decision-maker anymore. She was the one being decided about. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I kept my voice factual, almost gentle, because this wasn't about humiliation. It was about clarity. Why? She asked again, and this time the question was different. Not why are you telling me, but why did you do this? I considered the question. Chose my words carefully. You were right. I did need to be on a different level. I just took a different path to get there. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, but a kind of recognition. She'd underestimated me. She'd made a calculation based on incomplete information, and now the real equation was in front of her, and she was realizing how much she'd missed. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a keycard, sleek, black, with the Nuco logo embossed on the front. I slid it across the table, the same gesture she'd used when she'd asked for her spare key back. This is building access for the new headquarters. We're moving operations into post-close. You'll need it if you decide to stay. The retention package is generous, 2-year vest, equity options, salary bump. But it's your choice. She picked up the keycard, turned it over in her hands. You planned this. I built this, I corrected. The planning was already done. You just never looked closely enough to see it. She didn't respond. She just sat there, holding the key to a building she didn't yet have access to, run by a company I now controlled, in a future where all the power dynamics had reversed and she was the one trying to find her footing. I stood up, left cash on the table for both our drinks, and walked out into the February cold, leaving her with the choice and the keycard and the slow, dawning realization that the small story she'd needed me to be was never the one I was writing. She didn't take the keycard quietly. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in friction. Within 48 hours of our meeting, she'd requested a sit-down with Malcolm. I know because Tom's contact inside accounting forwarded me the calendar invite, urgent, leadership transition concerns. She spent an hour in Malcolm's office, door closed, and came out looking determined in a way that told me she'd made her case with everything she had. Malcolm called Richard that afternoon. Your buyer's VP of operations has some concerns about cultural fit. Wants to make sure we're doing our diligence on his operational experience. Cultural fit. Code 4, my ex-boyfriend is buying the company and this is a disaster waiting to happen. Richard handled it the way a good advisor does, calmly, with facts. He's run 3 pilot programs with companies in your vertical, generated measurable cost savings, and has backing from a fund that's closed 72 operational roll-ups. His personal history with an employee isn't relevant to the transaction. Malcolm agreed, but the seed was planted. She was positioning herself as indispensable, the institutional knowledge Malcolm couldn't afford to lose, the steady hand that would keep things running while I fumbled through learning a business I supposedly didn't understand. It was smart, actually. If I'd been in her position, facing an acquisition by someone who had every reason to want me gone, I'd have done the same thing. Secure your value, make yourself expensive to replace, turn your presence into a condition of the deal's success. But she'd miscalculated 2 things. First, Malcolm was exhausted. 6 years of grinding through vendor negotiations and staffing issues and profit margin pressures had worn him down to the point where a clean exit looked better than any amount of operational continuity. Second, I'd already negotiated retention bonuses for 5 key staff members, including her. She was on the list not because I needed her personally, but because the deal needed stability, and her leaving immediately would spook customers and suppliers. She didn't know that yet. She thought she was fighting for leverage she still had to earn. By day 3, word was leaking. Not officially, Malcolm hadn't announced anything, but in the way things always leak in mid-sized companies where everyone knows everyone and secrets have a half-life of about 72 hours. People were asking her questions. Is it true someone's buying us? Do you know who it is? Are we all getting fired? She couldn't answer directly, but she could shape the narrative. I started hearing secondhand, through mutual contacts, through Tom's network, that she was raising concerns about my qualifications, my temperament, my ability to scale. She never said anything actionable, nothing that would cross into defamation, but the subtext was clear: this is personal, not strategic, and it's going to blow up. My attorney, a sharp woman named Karen Vasquez who'd handled 3 acquisitions for me already, sent a letter. Not a lawsuit, just a cease and desist. Professional, firm, and narrow in scope, any statement suggesting improper motives or fitness for ownership may constitute defamation and interference with a commercial transaction. We trust this can be resolved without further action. She backed off. The whispers stopped. But the tension was public now, a thing people could feel even if they didn't know the details. The company was splitting into camps, people who trusted Malcolm's judgment and people who were loyal to her, who saw me as an outsider with unclear intentions. And then the deal itself started showing cracks. The close date, originally set for March 15th, slipped to March 20th because the title insurance company flagged an old mechanic's lien on one of Garrison's warehouse properties that hadn't been properly released. It took 3 days and $1,800 in legal fees to clear. Then the lender, a regional bank providing part of the acquisition financing, needed additional signatures from 2 board members who were traveling and couldn't be reached immediately. 5 days. A normal slip for a deal this size, the kind of friction that happens in every transaction when you're coordinating attorneys and bankers and title companies across state lines. But 5 days felt like forever when every morning brought a new text from Richard with an update that started with "small delay" or "one more thing." I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and run scenarios in my head, the kind of catastrophic thinking you know is irrational but can't shut off. What if Malcolm gets cold feet? What if her lobbying works and he decides I'm too risky? What if one of the angels pulls out at the last minute and the financing collapses? And underneath all of it, a quieter, more corrosive question: is this about the business, or is this about her? I called Tom at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, 9 days before the revised close date. "Tell me this makes sense," I said. "Tell me the IRR works and this isn't just me trying to prove something." He didn't patronize me. He pulled up the model, walked me through it again. "You're acquiring a company with $18 million in revenue and $1.4 million in EBITDA for an effective multiple of 5.7x. You're integrating software that will cut their costs by 15 to 20% within the first year. Your customer acquisition cost drops because you're inheriting their client base. The IRR is 32% if you hold it for 3 years and 18% if you exit in 5. It works regardless of who she is. That's why it's the right move." I wanted to believe him. I mostly did. But the doubt was there, sitting in my chest like a stone, whispering that maybe I'd confused strategy with vindication. The contrast was brutal. While I was losing sleep over title insurance and lender signatures and whether my motives were pure, she was doing what she'd always done, posting on Instagram, attending leadership offsites, maintaining the facade of control. But I could see the cracks now, because a mutual friend pulled me aside and told me something I hadn't expected. "She's scared," he said. "Not of you. Of being wrong. She built her whole identity around being the one who made the smart call, the mature decision. And now it's looking like maybe she didn't see the whole picture. That humanized her in a way I hadn't allowed before. She wasn't the villain of this story. She was just someone who'd made a judgment call with incomplete information and was now watching the consequences unfold in real time. She'd measured me by the only metric she trusted, salary, title, the visible markers of success, and missed everything happening underneath. I didn't need her to apologize. I didn't even need her to admit she was wrong. I just needed the deal to close, the machinery to keep grinding forward, the keys to the building to officially change hands. The close date held at March 20th. The lien cleared. The lender signed. The board approved. And I kept working, kept answering my attorney's questions, kept wiring deposits and signing documents, until the only thing left was the final signature and the wire transfer that would make it all real. She didn't take the keycard quietly. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in friction. Within 48 hours of our meeting, she'd requested a sit-down with Malcolm. I know because Tom's contact inside accounting forwarded me the calendar invite, urgent, leadership transition concerns. She spent an hour in Malcolm's office, door closed, and came out looking determined in a way that told me she'd made her case with everything she had. Malcolm called Richard that afternoon. "Your buyer's VP of operations has some concerns about cultural fit. Wants to make sure we're doing our diligence on his operational experience." Cultural fit. Code 4, my ex-boyfriend is buying the company and this is a disaster waiting to happen. Richard handled it the way a good advisor does, calmly, with facts. He's run 3 pilot programs with companies in your vertical, generated measurable cost savings, and has backing from a fund that's closed 72 operational roll-ups. His personal history with an employee isn't relevant to the transaction. Malcolm agreed, but the seed was planted. She was positioning herself as indispensable, the institutional knowledge Malcolm couldn't afford to lose, the steady hand that would keep things running while I fumbled through learning a business I supposedly didn't understand. It was smart, actually. If I'd been in her position, facing an acquisition by someone who had every reason to want me gone, I'd have done the same thing. Secure your value, make yourself expensive to replace, turn your presence into a condition of the deal's success. But she'd miscalculated 2 things. First, Malcolm was exhausted. 6 years of grinding through vendor negotiations and staffing issues and profit margin pressures had worn him down to the point where a clean exit looked better than any amount of operational continuity. Second, I'd already negotiated retention bonuses for 5 key staff members, including her. She was on the list not because I needed her personally, but because the deal needed stability, and her leaving immediately would spook customers and suppliers. She didn't know that yet. She thought she was fighting for leverage she still had to earn. By day 3, word was leaking. Not officially, Malcolm hadn't announced anything, but in the way things always leak in mid-sized companies where everyone knows everyone and secrets have a half-life of about 72 hours. People were asking her questions. Is it true someone's buying us? Do you know who it is? Are we all getting fired? She couldn't answer directly, but she could shape the narrative. I started hearing secondhand, through mutual contacts, through Tom's network, that she was raising concerns about my qualifications, my temperament, my ability to scale. She never said anything actionable, nothing that would cross into defamation, but the subtext was clear: this is personal, not strategic, and it's going to blow up. My attorney, a sharp woman named Karen Vasquez who'd handled 3 acquisitions for me already, sent a letter. Not a lawsuit, just a cease and desist. Professional, firm, and narrow in scope, any statement suggesting improper motives or fitness for ownership may constitute defamation and interference with a commercial transaction. We trust this can be resolved without further action. She backed off. The whispers stopped. But the tension was public now, a thing people could feel even if they didn't know the details. The company was splitting into camps, people who trusted Malcolm's judgment and people who were loyal to her, who saw me as an outsider with unclear intentions. And then the deal itself started showing cracks. The close date, originally set for March 15th, slipped to March 20th because the title insurance company flagged an old mechanic's lien on one of Garrison's warehouse properties that hadn't been properly released. It took 3 days and $1,800 in legal fees to clear. Then the lender, a regional bank providing part of the acquisition financing, needed additional signatures from 2 board members who were traveling and couldn't be reached immediately. 5 days. A normal slip for a deal this size, the kind of friction that happens in every transaction when you're coordinating attorneys and bankers and title companies across state lines. But 5 days felt like forever when every morning brought a new text from Richard with an update that started with "small delay" or "one more thing." I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and run scenarios in my head, the kind of catastrophic thinking you know is irrational but can't shut off. What if Malcolm gets cold feet? What if her lobbying works and he decides I'm too risky? What if one of the angels pulls out at the last minute and the financing collapses? And underneath all of it, a quieter, more corrosive question: is this about the business, or is this about her? I called Tom at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, 9 days before the revised close date. "Tell me this makes sense," I said. "Tell me the IRR works and this isn't just me trying to prove something." He didn't patronize me. He pulled up the model, walked me through it again. "You're acquiring a company with $18 million in revenue and $1.4 million in EBITDA for an effective multiple of 5.7x. You're integrating software that will cut their costs by 15 to 20% within the first year. Your customer acquisition cost drops because you're inheriting their client base. The IRR is 32% if you hold it for 3 years and 18% if you exit in 5. It works regardless of who she is. That's why it's the right move." I wanted to believe him. I mostly did. But the doubt was there, sitting in my chest like a stone, whispering that maybe I'd confused strategy with vindication. The contrast was brutal. While I was losing sleep over title insurance and lender signatures and whether my motives were pure, she was doing what she'd always done, posting on Instagram, attending leadership offsites, maintaining the facade of control. But I could see the cracks now, because a mutual friend pulled me aside and told me something I hadn't expected. "She's scared," he said. "Not of you. Of being wrong. She built her whole identity around being the one who made the smart call, the mature decision. And now it's looking like maybe she didn't see the whole picture. That humanized her in a way I hadn't allowed before. She wasn't the villain of this story. She was just someone who'd made a judgment call with incomplete information and was now watching the consequences unfold in real time. She'd measured me by the only metric she trusted, salary, title, the visible markers of success, and missed everything happening underneath. I didn't need her to apologize. I didn't even need her to admit she was wrong. I just needed the deal to close, the machinery to keep grinding forward, the keys to the building to officially change hands. The close date held at March 20th. The lien cleared. The lender signed. The board approved. And I kept working, kept answering my attorney's questions, kept wiring deposits and signing documents, until the only thing left was the final signature and the wire transfer that would make it all real. The deal closed on a Tuesday at 9:47 a.m., confirmed by a terse email from the title company with a single PDF attached. Closing statement, Garrison Supply Company. I was in my car outside the building when the wire cleared, watching the notification appear on my phone, the number that represented everything I'd worked toward for 90 days rendered in a single line of text. I sat there for 3 minutes, letting it settle. Then I got out, walked through the front doors, and used my new keycard for the first time. This was her domain. Had been for 4 years. She knew which conference rooms had the best light, which coffee maker on the second floor brewed fastest, which parking spots opened up first in the morning. She'd built relationships here, earned respect, climbed from senior manager to VP by being competent and consistent and exactly the kind of leader people trusted. Now it was mine. The all-hands was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the largest conference room, the one with windows overlooking the industrial park and enough chairs for the 43 employees who made Garrison run. Malcolm had sent the announcement the night before, brief, professional, focused on continuity and opportunity. New ownership, same commitment to quality and service. He'd be there to introduce me, then step back and let me set the tone. I arrived at 9:55. Malcolm was already there, shaking hands, doing the warm-up work that comes naturally to someone who spent 30 years knowing everyone's name and asking about their kids. He saw me, nodded, and the room quieted. She was sitting in the third row, 3 seats from the aisle. Stone-faced. Arms crossed. Not hostile, exactly, but armored. She'd chosen her spot carefully, close enough to be visible, far enough back to avoid being singled out. She was wearing a navy blazer I recognized, the one she wore to important meetings when she needed to project authority. Malcolm's introduction was gracious. He talked about legacy and evolution, about trusting me to carry the company forward, about how the decision hadn't been easy but felt right. He handed me the floor. I kept my remarks short. Vision for growth, integrate technology that would make operations more efficient and give customers better visibility. No layoffs planned, every role was essential, and stability mattered more than disruption. Integration timeline, 60 days for systems migration, ongoing support throughout. Respect for legacy, Malcolm built something worth preserving, and I intended to honor that. I didn't mention her. I didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew we had history. The smart play was to treat her like everyone else, a valued employee, essential to the transition, someone whose expertise I respected regardless of our personal past. The questions were predictable. What happens to our benefits? When do we meet the new team? How will reporting structures change? I answered each one calmly, directly, with the kind of specificity that builds trust. I'd prepared for this. Tom had coached me through it. Richard had reminded me that the first all-hands sets the tone for everything that follows. 40 minutes later, it was over. People stood, clustered in small groups, processing. Malcolm shook my hand again, this time as a formality that marked his exit. "You've got this," he said quietly. "And if you don't, you'll figure it out." I waited until most people had filtered out, then caught her eye. "Can you stay for a minute? I'd like to talk." She nodded. No words, just the acknowledgement that this conversation was inevitable. The conference room emptied. The door closed. We were alone for the first time since the restaurant, since the keycard, since the moment the power had shifted and neither of us had fully processed what that meant. I didn't sit. Neither did she. We stood on opposite sides of the table, the same table where she'd probably led 100 meetings, made 100 decisions, established herself as someone who belonged. "You said I wasn't on your level," I started. My voice was calm, measured, surgical. You were half right. I wasn't on the level you could see. But I was building a foundation you never looked down far enough to notice. She was quiet. Not defensive, not dismissive. Just quiet, the kind of silence that comes when someone's deciding whether to fight or concede. I didn't think you had it in you, she said finally. I underestimated you. I know. I nodded. That was the point. The contrast was so complete it didn't need elaboration. 4 months ago, she'd held all the authority in this building, VP title, Malcolm's trust, institutional knowledge that made her indispensable. She'd walked these halls with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she stood. Her loud breakup, executed with precision in a public restaurant, had been an exercise in power. She controlled the narrative, the timing, the terms. Now she was standing in a conference room she no longer controlled, in a building where every keycard, every system, every strategic decision would flow through me. My takeover had been quiet, methodical, invisible until it was complete. And now the power shift was absolute. I want to be clear about something, I continued. You're welcome to stay. The retention package is generous, 2-year vest, equity options, salary increase. You're good at what you do, and the company needs that continuity. But if you stay, it's because you choose to work for me. Not because you're owed anything. Not because of history or guilt or any other reason except that the role makes sense for both of us. She looked at me for a long moment. I couldn't read her expression, not anger, not resentment, but something closer to resignation mixed with a kind of respect she hadn't offered before. What if I don't stay? She asked. Then I'll wish you well, execute the separation agreement, and move forward. There's no animosity here. Just clarity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a new keycard, identical to the one I'd given her at the restaurant, but activated now, fully functional, tied to her employee profile in the new system Tom had set up over the weekend. I placed it on the table between us. This is yours if you want it. Building access, system permissions, everything you need to do your job. But it's your choice whether to use it. She picked up the keycard, turned it over in her hands the same way she'd done before. The motif was complete, keys as access, as power, as the infrastructure of belonging. She'd taken mine away in October. Now I was offering hers back, but only on terms I controlled. I need to think about it, she said. That's fair. Take the week. Let me know by Monday. She nodded, slipped the keycard into her pocket, and walked toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle, turned back. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm sorry. Not for the breakup. That was the right call for where I was. But for not seeing what you were building. That was arrogance. I appreciated the honesty. It didn't change anything, but it mattered. Noted, I said. She left. The door clicked shut. I stood there alone in the conference room, her old domain, my new responsibility, and felt the weight of what I'd just done. Not revenge. Not vindication. Just the calm, surgical completion of a strategy that had always been about proving something to myself, not to her. The power shift was complete. What came next was just work. She stayed. The decision came in an email on Sunday night, 4 days after the all-hands, professional and brief. I've reviewed the retention package. I'm accepting. Looking forward to contributing to the transition. Not out of desperation, she had options, a resume that would open doors at a dozen competitors, but out of pragmatism. The retention bonus vested over 2 years, the equity options were real, and she was genuinely good at her job. I wouldn't have kept the offer on the table otherwise. Competence matters more than comfort, and the company needed stability more than it needed drama. We weren't friends. We were barely colleagues in the traditional sense. But we were professionals, and that turned out to be enough. The first quarter was chaos dressed up as strategy. Integration timelines that looked clean on PowerPoint slides turned messy in execution, legacy data that didn't map cleanly to new systems, vendor contracts that needed renegotiation, employees who resisted change because change is inherently uncomfortable even when it's necessary. I'd expected this. Tom had warned me. Richard had walked me through 20 case studies of acquisitions that stumbled in month 2 because the acquiring team underestimated the friction of merging cultures. But underneath the chaos was the control of a plan being executed exactly as designed. I spent March and April integrating systems. My SaaS platform, the little tech thing that had started this entire trajectory, was plugged into Garrison's workflow in phases. First, inventory visibility for the 3 largest product lines. Then automated reorder triggers. Then vendor management dashboards that gave the ops team real-time data they'd never had before. The cost savings materialized within 60 days. Carrying costs dropped by 14%. Manual data entry that had consumed 2 full-time positions was automated, and I reassigned those employees to customer service roles that actually generated revenue. The thesis I'd pitched to investors, the model Tom had built, the promises I'd made to Malcolm, they all started proving out in spreadsheets that didn't lie. I promoted 2 junior operations managers in May, both of whom she'd overlooked when she was building her team. One was a woman named Lisa Chen who'd been stuck in a coordinator role for 3 years despite having a supply chain MBA and ideas that were consistently better than the people above her. The other was a guy named Marcus Webb who'd been running the Memphis warehouse with efficiency metrics that outperformed every other location, but no one had thought to ask him how. She noticed. She didn't say anything directly, but I saw her face in the team meeting where I announced the promotions. Recognition, maybe some embarrassment, that she'd had access to this talent and hadn't elevated it. I set boundaries early and enforced them consistently. No personal conversations beyond what was required for work. No post-work overlap. If there was a team dinner or happy hour, we attended separately or I declined entirely. Clean reporting lines. She reported to Tom, who reported to me, which gave us the buffer of one person between decision-maker and executor. It wasn't comfortable. But comfort wasn't the goal. Function was the goal, and the company functioned. By the end of Q2, the numbers told the story better than any narrative could. Revenue grew 18% quarter-over-quarter, driven partly by operational synergies and partly by cross-selling my platform to Garrison's existing customer base. 3 clients who'd been using legacy systems for 15 years switched to our integrated solution within 90 days. 2 of Garrison's largest competitors reached out asking about acquisition or partnership conversations. The metrics were normal for an operational roll-up done right, not miraculous, not explosive, just the steady compounding of good decisions executed with discipline. But normal felt like victory when you'd spent 6 months being told you didn't have what it took. I started sleeping again. Not perfectly, running a company is inherently anxiety-inducing, and there were still nights when I'd wake up at 3 a.m. worrying about cash flow or customer churn or whether I'd promoted the right people. But the existential doubt was gone. The question of whether I'd confused revenge with strategy, whether this had been about the business or about her, whether I was capable of actually doing this, those questions had been answered. The contrast was striking in hindsight. The chaos of the transition, the resisted changes, the awkward meetings, the daily friction of merging 2 different ways of operating, had been real. But underneath it was the control that comes from having a plan and executing it without deviation. I'd known the first quarter would be hard. I'd budgeted for it, emotionally and financially. And because I'd expected the turbulence, I could navigate it without panic. She settled into her role with the same competence she'd always brought to work. We passed each other in hallways, exchanged updates in team meetings, collaborated on projects where our expertise overlapped. It was professional, functional, and entirely free of the personal weight that had defined our relationship before. One afternoon in June, I was working late in my office, the corner one that used to be Malcolm's, the one with windows overlooking the parking lot and a door I could close when I needed to think. She knocked, asked if she could come in. Lisa's promotion was the right call, she said. I should have seen it earlier. I nodded. She's good. You trained her well. I trained her to do tasks. You gave her authority. There's a difference. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement we'd had since the all hands, and I appreciated it. Not because I needed her approval, but because it signaled we could work together without the past bleeding into every interaction. Appreciate you saying that, I said. She left. The door closed. And I went back to work, the kind of unglamorous operational work that doesn't make good stories but builds companies that last. The keys motif had run its course, but the metaphor lingered. I'd built a life where no one could take my keys again, not to a building, not to a relationship, not to the infrastructure of my own ambition. The access I had now was something I'd constructed deliberately, piece by piece, through decisions that prioritized long-term ownership over short-term validation. If this resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, told you weren't enough by someone who couldn't see the foundation you were laying, then you understand why the next chapter matters. I'm documenting this build, the acquisitions that follow, the way you turn one good decision into a portfolio of leverage. Hit subscribe, because you'll want to see where it goes. The company stabilized. The team gelled. The revenue grew. And I kept building, because that's what you do when you've proven to yourself that you were never the small story someone else needed you to be.